Hey folks, I know I am just an old guy telling stories, but please leave a like and subscribe before we start. Let's enjoy in today's stories. It all started about a year ago when I made a mistake that I'm still paying for. I'm not a reckless person by nature, but desperation has a way of clouding your judgment. I was in a tough spot financially, like really tough. The kind of situation where every single day is a balancing act between bills, rent, and just trying to survive. My job at the time wasn't cutting it, and despite countless applications and interviews, nothing else was panning out. I had maxed out my credit cards, borrowed from friends, and even sold off some personal stuff to stay afloat. But it wasn't enough. Then, in a moment of sheer panic, I did something incredibly stupid. I had heard about the dark web, mostly from urban legends and horror stories, but I never thought I'd find myself actually digging through it. I wasn't looking for anything illegal, just some way, any way, to get some quick cash. That's when I stumbled upon a forum that seemed different. It wasn't flashy, no creepy images or cryptic messages, just a plain old thread with a title that read, "Need money? No credit check, no collateral, instant approval." I knew it was shady, of course I knew, but I was desperate. I clicked on the thread and scrolled through the comments. People were talking about how they'd received thousands of dollars within minutes, no questions asked. It sounded too good to be true, but desperation has a way of making you ignore the obvious red flags. At the bottom of the thread, there was a contact link. I hesitated for a long time before clicking it, but in the end, I did. It led me to a simple form where I had to fill in my name, email, and the amount I wanted to borrow. I typed in $5,000, a ridiculous sum, but one that would clear my immediate debts and give me some breathing room. After submitting the form, I sat there staring at the screen, half expecting nothing to happen. But within minutes, my phone pinged with a notification. I checked my bank account, and there it was, $5,000, just like that. No approval process, no confirmation email, just the money sitting in my account. For a few days, I was on cloud nine. I paid off my debts, caught up on my bills, and even treated myself to a few things I hadn't been able to afford in a long time. But that high was short-lived. About a week later, I received an email from a sender simply named Collector. The email was short and to the point. "Your repayment terms have begun. Details will follow." No signature, no contact information, just that one ominous line. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I hadn't really thought about the repayment terms when I borrowed the money. There hadn't been any fine print or contracts, just the instant cash. I figured there would be some interest or penalties if I was late, but nothing too extreme. 2 days later, I got another email. This time, it had an attachment, a PDF file titled Terms. I opened it and my heart sank. The document was several pages long, detailing the repayment schedule and penalties for missing payments. But the interest rate was the part that made my head spin, 100% compounded weekly. It was an astronomical figure, one that would turn my $5,000 debt into an insurmountable sum within a matter of months. Panicking, I tried to reply to the email, asking for more reasonable terms, but my message bounced back. There was no way to contact the collector directly, no way to renegotiate. I felt like I was drowning. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and dread. I made the first payment on time, but it barely made a dent in the balance. The second payment was even harder to scrape together. By the third, I was completely tapped out. And that's when the emails started getting more frequent, more urgent. Payment due in 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in further action. I didn't have the money. I couldn't make the payment. And that's when things started getting really weird. It started small, a knock at the door late at night with no one there when I checked. My mail began to go missing, or I'd find it scattered across the front lawn. One morning I woke up to find my car had been keyed. Deep, jagged scratches that spelled out a single word. Pay. I was being watched, that much was clear, but by who or what, I had no idea. The next email came with instructions. If I couldn't pay, I'd have to perform certain tasks to work off the debt. The tasks were strange but not dangerous at first. I was told to deliver a package to an address across town, no questions asked. Then I had to leave an envelope full of cash in a locker at the bus station. These were the kinds of things you'd expect in a crime thriller, not in real life. But I did them, because I had no choice. The emails were always watching, always waiting for me to slip up. As the weeks passed, the tasks grew more unsettling. I was told to break into an abandoned house and take photos of the inside. Another time I was instructed to follow a man around the city, taking notes on his movements. I had no idea what I was involved in, but I was in too deep to back out. The fear of what might happen if I refused was enough to keep me compliant. Then came the day I received a task that made my blood run cold. I was to pick up a package from a specific location and deliver it to an address I didn't recognize. The instructions were clear. Under no circumstances was I to open the package. The delivery was to be made at midnight and I was to leave it on the doorstep without knocking. This was the first time I truly feared for my life. What if the package contained something illegal? What if I was caught? I knew I was being watched, so there was no way I could refuse. I did as I was told. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sealing my fate. As I drove away from the drop-off point, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Good job, your debt is almost paid." That should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like a death sentence. Almost paid wasn't good enough. I needed out. The next day I tried to go to the police, but as soon as I mentioned the dark web and the money I had borrowed, they shut me down. They said there was nothing they could do, that I was lucky I hadn't been scammed out of my money entirely. I left the station feeling more alone than ever. I tried to ignore the emails after that, but the collector wasn't having it. The tasks became more frequent, more dangerous, and the threats more explicit. I was caught in a web of fear with no way out. I had borrowed $5,000 and it had cost me my peace of mind, my sense of security, and maybe soon, my life. But this is just the beginning. What happened next made me wish I'd never heard of the dark web, never borrowed that money, and never underestimated the lengths people will go to when they're owed a debt. After that last delivery, things went quiet for a while. I thought, maybe naively, that I was finally in the clear. The text message I had received had said my debt was almost paid, and I clung to that word almost like it was my lifeline. I was hoping that if I just kept my head down and did as I was told, this nightmare would eventually end. But as I should have expected by now, it wasn't going to be that simple. About a week after the midnight delivery, I received another email. This one was different from the others. There was no task, no threats, just a single line of text. "It's time we met in person." I can't begin to describe the sheer terror that ran through me when I read those words. I had been dreading this moment, fearing the day when this faceless collector would finally step out of the shadows. Up until now, they had been a ghost, someone I could pretend wasn't real if I tried hard enough. But meeting in person, that meant they were real, and worse, that they knew where to find me. The email included a time and place, a small cafe on the outskirts of town, the kind of place you only go if you're trying to avoid attention. I was supposed to be there at 10 p.m. and I was told to come alone. There was no mention of what would happen if I didn't show up, but by now I knew better than to ignore their demands. The day of the meeting, I was a wreck. I couldn't focus on anything at work, my mind racing with all the possible scenarios. Were they going to hurt me? Was this a trap? Or worse, was this just the beginning of something far more sinister? I considered not going, but I knew that would only make things worse. So, with a pit in my stomach and my nerves shot, I headed to the cafe that night. When I arrived, the place was almost empty. A couple of people sat at the counter, sipping coffee and minding their own business. I scanned the room, looking for someone who might be waiting for me, but no one stood out. I was about to take a seat when a man in a dark suit approached me. "You're here," he said, his voice calm and cold. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He was tall, with a lean build and sharp features. His eyes were hidden behind a pair of tinted glasses, which somehow made him gesture to a booth in the corner, and I followed him over, sitting down across from him. "I've been watching you," he said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "You've been doing well so far, but we have some unfinished business." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I thought my debt was almost paid. He smiled, a thin, humorless smile that sent a chill through me. "Almost, but not quite. You see, the money you borrowed came with certain expectations. You've met some of those expectations, but there's more work to be done." I didn't dare ask what kind of work he meant. I already knew it wasn't going to be anything good. "Here's how this is going to work," he continued. "You'll be given a final series of tasks. Complete them, and your debt will be considered repaid in full. Fail, and, well, I'm sure you understand the consequences." He slid a small envelope across the table to me. I hesitated before picking it up, my hands trembling as I did. Inside was a piece of paper with an address written on it. No instructions, no details, just an address. "You'll go there tonight," he said, leaning back in his seat as if the conversation was over. "You'll find everything you need when you arrive. I trust you'll make the right decisions." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. Without another word, he stood up and left the cafe, leaving me alone in the booth with the envelope clutched in my hand. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't just about money anymore. It felt like I was being dragged deeper into something much darker, something I didn't fully understand. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to leave the cafe and head to the address. It was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, an old industrial area that had seen better days. The buildings were mostly abandoned, their windows broken, and their walls covered in graffiti. The streetlights were few and far between, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The address led me to a rundown warehouse at the end of a narrow alley. I could see a faint light coming from inside, and as I approached, I noticed that the large metal door was slightly ajar. Every instinct in my body was telling me to turn around and run, but I knew I couldn't. I had to see this through, no matter how much I wanted to escape. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warehouse was mostly empty, save for a few crates and broken-down machinery. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair, and sitting on the chair was a small black duffel bag. My heart pounded as I approached it, my mind racing with all the possible horrors that could be inside. When I reached the chair, I hesitated for a moment before unzipping the bag. To my relief, it wasn't anything dangerous, at least not immediately. Inside the bag were several stacks of cash, neatly bound together with rubber bands. There was also a small burner phone with a single contact saved on it, labeled only as "Contact." I stared at the phone, dreading what I knew I had to do next. This wasn't just about delivering packages or taking pictures anymore. This was something much bigger, and I was right in the middle of it. But I had no choice. I had come too far to back out now. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang only once before a voice on the other end answered. "Good, you found the package. Now listen carefully." The voice was the same as the man from the cafe, calm, cold, and devoid of any emotion. He gave me instructions for my next task, one that made my stomach drop. I was to deliver the bag of cash to another address, but this time I wasn't to leave it at the door. I was to go inside, meet the person waiting for me, and hand it over directly. "You'll know him when you see him," the voice said before hanging up. I was left standing in that empty warehouse, clutching the phone and the duffel bag, trying to summon the courage to go through with it. I didn't want to meet this person. I didn't want to know what I was involved in, but I had no choice. I was trapped, and the only way out was to keep going forward. The new address was in an even rougher part of town, and by the time I got there, it was well past midnight. The building was an old, dilapidated apartment complex, the kind where the elevators haven't worked in years and the stairwells smell like urine. I climbed the stairs to the third floor, the bag of cash feeling like a lead weight in my hands. When I reached the apartment, I hesitated before knocking on the door. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure whoever was inside could hear it. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, and I was met with a pair of cold, unblinking eyes. The man who opened the door was nothing like I expected. He was old, maybe in his late 60s, with thin white hair and a hunched posture. He looked frail, like he could barely stand, but there was something in his eyes that told me he was far more dangerous than he appeared. "You're late," he said, his voice raspy but firm. I didn't know what to say, so I just handed him the bag. He took it without a word, opened it, and began counting the money with surprising speed. When he was done, he nodded once and motioned for me to leave. "Tell them it's done," he said before closing the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned by how anticlimactic the whole thing had been. I had expected something more, something terrifying or violent, but instead it was just this old man counting money in a dingy apartment. But as I walked back down the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. There was something more going on, something that I was only just beginning to glimpse. When I got back to my car, I used the burner phone to call the number again. The same voice answered, and I told him what the old man had said. "Good. You're almost there," the voice replied. "But there's one more thing you need to do." I knew it. I knew this wasn't over yet. And as the voice on the other end of the line began to explain my final task, I realized just how deep I had gotten myself into this mess. This last task was different, more personal, more dangerous. It wasn't just about delivering money or packages anymore. This was something that could change everything, and that's when I knew there was no going back now. I spent the entire drive home trying to make sense of what had just happened. The old man in the apartment, the cold voice on the phone, the never-ending tasks. None of it made any sense. It was like I was living in some twisted version of reality where every move I made was being controlled by someone else. And now, with this final task looming over me, I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, with no idea how far the fall would be. When I got home, I barely slept. My phone call, the one where the voice told me about the final task. I hadn't gotten many details, just that it was something I needed to do quickly and discreetly. The voice didn't give me an address this time. Instead, it told me to wait for further instructions. I hated the waiting. It made the fear and anxiety even worse. The next morning, as I was trying to go about my day as normally as possible, the burner phone buzzed. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the text. "Tonight, 11 p.m., meet at the usual place." I didn't know what the usual place was. I had never met these people outside of that cafe, but I figured that's what they meant. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. By the time 11 p.m. rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves. But I couldn't delay any longer. I grabbed the burner phone and headed out, my thoughts racing with every possible scenario. When I arrived at the cafe, the man in the dark suit was already there, sitting at the same booth in the corner. He didn't acknowledge me when I walked in, but I knew he was waiting for me. I slid into the booth across from him, my hands sweating as I waited for him